Hello, everybody, and welcome to CELPIP Listening Pro. This is Brandy speaking, and I will be your presenter today. So I have been helping people prepare for about 6 years now for the CELPIP test. I am an online instructor. I'm very pleased to be here today and give you all a little bit of practice with the listening components of CELPIP. Please let me know in our Zoom chat box, by the way, if this is your very first CELPIP webinar, or if you have attended other webinars in the past. Do I have any newcomers today? Let me know. Okay, I figured I might. I can see already in the Zoom chat that we do have quite a few, as I call them, newbies. Oh, Priscilla, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful news also in the Zoom chat that you got such high scores on your CELPIP test. That is so exciting, and it's a great way to start off our session today. And you're giving everybody else here who is new very positive feedback in a way that it is achievable to get those high scores. So thanks for sharing that. Wonderful news, wonderful news. All right. Excellent. Anyway, welcome, whether you're new or whether you've been here before, welcome to everybody. Now, as we are settling in here, I always remind you that the Zoom chat box is where we're going to communicate today, as we're already doing. As you can see, all those questions and comments are coming in there. We keep the microphones on mute throughout the session by default, just because we usually get quite large audiences here. And obviously, we can't all speak up at once if we've got questions. So please put any questions you might have about CELPIP in the Zoom chat, and either myself or my colleague Simon, who's online as well, he can type with you in that Zoom chat. Between the two of us, we'll make sure to answer questions that arise. And we are going to be practicing our note-taking skills today, and that is because I think to be very successful on the CELPIP listening, you're going to want to write down the important parts of the conversations you hear. So to practice that skill and get you ready, we're going to do lots of note-taking practice today. So please make sure you do have a pen and a paper, etc., nearby. So when it comes time to practice this important skill, you'll be in good position to do so. Now, I just had a question about the webinar recordings, and here's my answer to that question. Later on today, within the next 24 hours, we'll say, we are going to email you, and there will be 3 links within the email. There will be a link to take you to a study pack of materials, and that study pack will summarize the important listening strategies that we are talking about today. There's also a link to access a survey. That part's completely optional, but if you do want to give feedback, of course, we welcome feedback there. Last but not least, there will be a link to take you to our YouTube channel where we keep a master copy recording of every single free webinar that we deliver. So we're not recording today's precise live webinar to share with you later. Instead, you'll get what we call that master copy that is housed permanently on the YouTube channel. It's the exact same content. So if you do need to log out before 2 hours is up today and before we finish, you can always click on this link. It will open up the recorded version of Listening Pro, and you can certainly catch up on anything that you might have missed or just want to review again. So that's your option there. Now, I'll quickly mention, just in case you don't know yet, that the CELPIP test, of course, is taken for Canadian immigration. That is the primary reason this test was created many years ago now. It's just recently been accepted into Australia as well. So if you ever someday decide you'd rather live and work in Australia instead of Canada, you have that option. It's the same exact CELPIP test, but it just opens up more doors as far as where you might want to immigrate to. So I thought I'd mention that as an interesting point, and just in case it does apply to anybody here online today. Now, here's what we're going to do in the next couple of hours together. I will start out, of course, by giving you a brief overview of what this listening test is all about. And that means we'll have a look at the computer screens, since you will be taking CELPIP online. We're also going to talk about the types of questions you need to prepare for and how this test is scored. That part's really important. And after we get through that introduction, we are going to do guided practice for all 6 listening parts that you will encounter on your own CELPIP test. So you can see them listed here. All of these questions and conversations, by the way, are taken from a past CELPIP test. So they were once upon a time real test questions. They've been retired though, meaning you're never going to encounter them again on a future test. But it gives us really good authentic practice today as we prepare. And at the very end, I will take a couple of extra minutes to go over our study materials for CELPIP, not just for listening, but for the entire test itself. There are several free materials that I'll mention first, and I'll also quickly introduce you to the online bookstore. So let's get started then with our listening test overview. So as I mentioned, you've got 6 parts to complete, and you must complete them in this exact order. You do not have a choice about what you want to do first. You just complete the questions that are showing on your computer screens. You do not need to memorize ahead of time the number of questions or minutes per part, but I think it's just helpful to have a general sense of roughly how many questions and how long you'll be spending on each part. So this chart shows that nicely. If you look at the questions column, you'll notice that you are going to be answering anywhere from 5 to 8 questions at a time, depending on the part you're working through. And if you look over to that timing or that approximate timing column, you can see the time varies from 5 minutes at the shortest to about 9 minutes at the longest. So again, it's just nice to have that time management plan coming into the test. So the fastest anybody would work through these questions on the test would be about 46 minutes. And that's to cover all 6 parts. You have up to a maximum of 55 minutes because you do have a little bit of control about how fast you might want to click through the screens. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. As far as your listening test features go, I will reassure you in a sense that all of the conversations you're going to hear will be spoken and recorded, right, through your headset. You'll be hearing the speakers talk to you, and they do have what I'll call Canadian accents or North American accents. So I will use myself as an example right now. I'm from Northern Ontario, but I now live in Vancouver, which is in British Columbia. And since I was born and raised in Canada, and English is my first language, we can refer to my accent right now as that typical Canadian accent. And I mentioned this as a benefit in a way, because since you know all the speakers on the test are going to sound sort of like I do right now, as you're preparing, you just want to familiarize your ear with that accent. And you don't need to worry about hearing other English accents that you're less familiar with. So at no point will you hear, for example, a British accent or an Australian or a Scottish or what have you. So just prepare yourself for Canadian accents, and that will help. You'll understand the words better, I would suggest, if you do it that way. The audio clips that you're going to be listening to are going to start automatically when you begin a part, and they only play once through. You cannot pause or replay them. And then the questions you're answering will come after that audio has finished. And this is why we say, please take notes as you're listening. Even if you're already a highly proficient English language communicator, I think it's still wise to jot down the key points, because when it gets to the questions, you simply want to remember or have in front of you a list of those ideas so that you'll more efficiently answer questions. This is not a memory test, it's a language test, but writing down those key points will help keep you on track. And this is really important too for all of you to know. The questions and the passages themselves, I guess, will increase in difficulty as this test moves forward. So part 1, I would call the easiest part, and that's because the vocabulary will likely be more relatable, I'll say. You'll probably understand more of the meanings. The types of questions too will be easier to manage. But by the time you get about halfway through this test, I find starting around part 4 and then all the way into part 6 towards the end, those would be more intermediate to advanced level. So the vocabulary will be noticeably higher level, and the types of questions too are going to require a little more critical thinking from you. So lots more inference and so on. And I'll explain what I mean by inference questions here. Throughout this entire test, you're going to have 3 different types of questions that you might encounter at any given time. You have to be ready to answer. So those general meaning questions you see here on the left, I'll call these really big, broad topics or scopes. So a classic example that I'm confident you'll encounter at some point will be something like this. It might just be, what is the main idea of this conversation? Or what are the man and woman speaking about? So when we get a question like this, we really have to look at pretty much all the notes we've taken on that conversation, and we're going to rely on larger chunks of the audio to come up with the answer. Your specific information questions, though, are much easier, I think, and that is because these questions will focus your attention on one particular detail, and these will be the 5 W's. So either a who, what, where, when, or why. So when you understand which of those W's the question is asking you to find, you would look through your notes and discover that particular detail. And usually in your notes, it could even be one word you've written down, at the very most, it would be a very small section of your notes. So we tend to find information more quickly when we know exactly what we're looking for. So you will encounter, I'll suggest, more of these specific information type questions in the first half of the listening test. Again, because it's the easiest part. The inference, though, right here on the end, these would be probably the most challenging for a good number of us. And that is because when you make an inference, what you're doing is drawing conclusions, making connections and assumptions about what you've been listening to. So your answer choices for these questions will not have been stated directly in the conversation. Instead, you have to understand what you've just heard. And then looking at those answer choices, you're going to use logic and reasoning to select the answer that makes the most sense. So as I say, the whole CELPIP is a language test, but a part of any communication would be the ability to make connections and so on. So that's what inference is all about. You'll probably have more inference type questions on the last half of CELPIP. So parts 4 to 6, again, because those sections are more intermediate to upper level or advanced. Okay, I'm going to jump into some note-taking strategies, and I'm going to let Simon handle all of those big paragraph questions coming into the Zoom chat so we can keep the session moving forward smoothly. So here's what we're going to practice today. When you take the actual test, of course, you get paper and pen right in the testing center. But today at home or wherever you're listening from, you need to be responsible for your own pen and paper. Okay, and when we practice our notes today, and when you take notes in the actual testing center, what you'll want to do is write down just the key words you're listening to. So I always say use point form. And what that would look like is basically writing a list from top to bottom on your page. So every time you've got a new idea, I would put that word or just a couple of words, keep it short, on a separate line. So top to bottom. And we want to use abbreviations, which are short forms. And these might be initials. They might be little symbols that you draw, like a happy face if somebody's happy and so on. So each of us will need to find our own way of capturing these details as quickly as we can. But we have to remember what the notes mean when we look back at them. That's important too. Here's a really good tip. The answers, or I guess the questions you're answering, are going to usually follow the same order as the audio is playing. So when I say write your notes from top to bottom on the page of paper, usually if you're answering, say, the last question of the entire conversation, chances are the information you're going to need to answer that question will be found towards the bottom of your notes. So when you organize your notes, you're saving yourself a ton of time later on when you answer these questions. And another hot tip, you are the only one who sees your notes. So you do not have to worry about being overly neat with your handwriting. As long as you can read your own handwriting, that's all that matters. You also don't need to worry about things like spelling or grammar and so on. Your whole purpose for taking notes is to remind you yourself about the important details. And when you leave the testing room after the test is finished, you're simply going to hand in the notes you've taken to a staff member, and those notes go in the recycle bin. So they don't count towards your score. They're just there to help you out. And I think that's important to note. Okay, let's talk about how this test is scored. I think this is so important. So of the entire 6 parts you'll be completing for listening, there are 38 questions altogether that are going to be scored. So when you look at this little score chart, you'll notice at the very top, 38 out of 38 would be a perfect CELPIP listening test score, and that would earn you an automatic level 12. So level 12 is the top score anybody could achieve on any part of the CELPIP test, listening included. And the scoring system is quite simple because you're going to earn 1 point for every single answer that you get correct. And it is the computer that's going to score you for listening and for reading too, for that matter, in case you're interested. The multiple choice answers that you're choosing between, there will be 4 answers. Well, the computer knows which of the answers is correct. So if you get it right, you get a point, plain and simple. And the good news is that you never lose marks if you get an answer wrong. So my best advice to you is try your best, of course, to narrow down the list of choices. So if you've got 4 answer choices and you know that 2 are obviously wrong, that's a good start. If you're still torn between the two remaining answers, for example, and you're not 100% sure which is the right answer, just take a guess. Honestly, if you guess right, you get a point. If you guess wrong, nothing happens. No penalty, no deduction. Never leave an answer blank, because then there's absolutely no opportunity to earn that point. So again, these are all tips that I'd like to share with you. Pardon me. Okay, so I can see you're keeping Simon nice and busy in the chat box. That's wonderful. Keep it going. Simon, you'll thank me later. I'm going to continue on now with part one. We're going to get right into some note-taking and some practice. Okay, part one is called listening to problem solving. In this situation, you will have two speakers, and I'll let you know that when there are two speakers on any conversation, there will be one man and one woman. And that is just to help you identify the difference between the two speakers' voices, plain and simple. Because we call this listening to problem solving, clearly one of the speakers wants to help the other. Usually there's a problem to solve. That's why it's called listening to problem solving. So for example, you might have a supervisor who's meeting with a new employee to train them all about their first day at work. Maybe you're listening to a customer who is requesting help from a cashier so they can make a purchase. Whatever the topic is, it's going to be based on day-to-day type situations. All right, so the whole CELPIP test is designed to test your ability to communicate in the real world. Because part one is the easiest part, it is also the only part that is separated down into 3 different chunks or different audio clips. It's the same two people talking, and it's one conversation all the way through. But as I mentioned, the length of time you're listening to each part is only about 1.5 minutes. So you don't have to concentrate for the entire conversation all the way through, which makes it just a bit easier. So you'll hear the first part of this conversation. It's about 1.5 minutes, and then you're going to answer a couple or 3 questions about what you've just heard. You'll take your notes and complete those questions. And then those same two people are going to just continue that conversation. And again, you'll listen and take notes. You'll answer another 2 or 3 questions based on that second part. And then finally, you'll hear the third and concluding section of that same conversation and answer the remaining questions. So this is the only listening part that is, I'll call it chunked down or divided up for you. As I say, it makes it a little bit easier. The less time you have to concentrate on any given audio clip, I would argue makes it a little bit easier for you. So we'll practice with at least the first part of this conversation here today. Okay, before you actually hear the conversation playing, you're going to have a little, I call this an instructional screen. So you can see that we take these questions, by the way, from one of our free practice tests that is publicly available on the website. So at the very top left corner, you'll see it says practice test B. This says listening part 1, or listening to problem solving. So you'll notice these instructions, and I'll read them out loud just this one time, just to get you acquainted with the information associated here. So this one, because it's part 1, it says you will hear a conversation in 3 sections. You will hear each section only once, so we know that now. After each section, you will hear 2 or 3 questions, and you will hear the questions only once. Notice I said you will hear the questions. So from listening parts 1 to 3, when those questions arrive, you don't actually read the questions on your computer screen. You'll hear a recorded voice again through your headset that you're wearing say these questions out loud. And because they only play once, you really have to be listening. If you miss the question, then it makes it really difficult to answer. So we always have to be on and paying attention here. And of course, we'll choose the best answer from the 4 possible answers on screen, multiple choice style. Now, when you study long enough for the CELPIP test, you should be familiar with this information, right? Coming into the testing room, you'll know that listening part 1 is divided into 3 sections and so on. So I would first recommend that you use the time that these instructions are being read to you. Use that time to start setting up your notes. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. It's not hard, but you just want to take a moment to get your notes set up. And then if you're ready to go, rather than sit here and wait for these instructions to be read, you can click that next button in the top right-hand corner. And the moment you click next, you're just going to move yourself a little bit more quickly through to the next computer screen. And you're going to see these blue next buttons on just about every screen throughout the entire CELPIP test, whether you're doing the listening, reading, writing, or speaking sections. So this gives you a little bit of control on how quickly you'll finish the entire test overall. You do need to be aware, though, that there's no back button. So once you click next, you're moving forward. You cannot return to the previous part to do more work. Only use that next button when you're ready to move forward. And when you click next, if there's a little bit of time left on your screen, you don't get to carry the time with you to the next section. So every single part that you begin with, it's going to have its own preset number of minutes or seconds. So those are two features that you need to know about for that next button. Anyway, for our listening part 1, again, it's the easiest part of the entire listening test. So it's the only one as well that gives you a picture of the two people that you're about to listen to on the next computer screen. And you'll notice there are a couple of sentences right above this picture that gives you a very general sense about what's happening. So I'll read this out loud to you. You would be noting this yourself if it was your own test. So it tells us you will hear a conversation between a man and a woman. And we can see them listed or on screen there. And then it tells us the conversation takes place in an office. So when you look at this picture, I don't think it's a surprise to us that this is an office setting. I mean, look at the clothing the man and the woman are both wearing. Look at those filing cabinets and such in the background. So we have that very general overview. This is some sort of a workplace conversation. What I would advise you do here while you're looking at this picture is try to make some predictions about the types of topics you might be encountering next. So because they're talking at work, can any one of you suggest in our Zoom chat box right now, what do you think these two people are going to be talking about? What are some very typical workplace conversations that we might hear if we were sitting in some sort of an office room like you see pictured? Yeah, David's suggesting maybe it's an upcoming project that they're both working on. That makes sense. Pujan's wondering, are they talking about a vacation that's coming up? That could be, sure. Or maybe it's a company event, Fam is suggesting. Yep, for sure. David's wondering if this is some sort of an interview, like maybe one's being interviewed and they're hiring. Yeah, could be. Why not, right? So all of your, an appraisal. Alawatosan is suggesting, yeah, maybe this is a job performance review and they're meeting, right? So all of your predictions right now are very logical and suitable. I mean, it could be any number of those. And the reason I want you to try to predict in your own mind about what you might hear next is because it really focuses the brain and the ears, in this case, on the workplace situation. Now, when they begin to speak, of course, we might not be correct. Maybe it's not an interview. Maybe they're not planning a company event. But at the very least, if you're already running through your mind the types of conversations that are possible here, as soon as you do identify the actual topic, you're just more focused. That's all we're doing. So this activity, I would just refer to it as pre-listening. You're setting the stage in your own mind and getting ready for what's to come next. Okay, so with that in mind, after these instructions are read to you, you can either click next or just wait a few seconds and the computer screen will move you forward automatically. And you finally get to the screen where you're about to listen. All right, so here, those instructions in blue say, listen to the conversation. You will hear the conversation only once. It is about 1 to 1.5 minutes long. I find that really helpful. Again, you don't have to memorize how long each conversation is because the computer screen will remind you right before you hear it. You know roughly how long you'll need to concentrate. And then when you actually do hear the recordings, you're going to see the word playing on screen. And when you see playing, it tells you that you should be hearing the two voices speak through that headset loudly and clearly. If for whatever reason in the testing room you cannot hear the sound clearly, I'd like you to raise your hand and call a staff member over right away, and they will help troubleshoot the issue. There is time to, all the equipment is tested before each and every test sitting begins. So most often it should be fine. I don't foresee why the computer equipment would not be working. But as I say, just in case, this is what the word playing means to you, so you should be hearing. There is a volume button right on your headset, by the way, usually on the cord of that headset. So if you do need to increase or decrease the volume, you certainly could. Anyway, when you see that word, you know the conversation is being played. That blue bar right beneath the word playing is actually the timer in this case. So as this will be about 1.5 minutes in length, the conversation, it'll take that long for that blue bar to make its way over to the end. So it's going to fill up all the white space on screen. That's just helpful as you're taking notes. You just want to keep an eye on the movement of that blue bar, and you'll know when the conversation's wrapping up and it's time to stop taking your notes. That's all that's there for. So before I actually do the first practice activity with you, I'd like to talk briefly about how you might take notes. Okay, we all have different ways of jotting down important information. I would suggest we try it this way if you've never done this before. You know you have two speakers. You know you're going to have a man and a woman, right? That's a given for your part one. So if I were you, and you can do this right now if you want to, just quickly draw, I call it a T, like the letter T, or a T-bar chart. You're setting up the two columns. And I've got man and woman at the top. You can make that even shorter if you want. If you want to just put M and W, I think you're going to know what those two symbols mean. But find a way to identify the speakers. And we also know that in listening part one, it's divided into 3 different sections of audio. So why not just label this as part one? So that's what I've done clearly here. So when the instructions for each part are being read to you, this is all I would write down. It might take, 4 or 5 seconds to get these notes set up. It doesn't take long, but you want to have your notes set up and ready to go when the audio actually plays. It'll just keep you more organized. So whenever we hear the man make a really important point, we're going to write down those key points there under his column, and likewise with the woman. So we'll want to identify first that general topic of conversation. So what are they talking about? And then we're going to focus in for the details. Think about those 5 W's. So the who, what, where, when, why. If both of these people introduce themselves by name, write it down. You'll probably get a question involving names later anyway. Maybe they'll introduce or imply their job titles. That would be a who type detail as well, and I would write that down. We already know the where. We already know they're in an office setting, so that part maybe isn't so important here, but there could be a when. There will certainly be lots and lots of details about what they're discussing, so we'll want to write down what we can as we're able. Okay, so let's do this very first practice together. Remember, this is about 1.5 minutes in length that you're going to be listening for. So I trust that you've got your notes ready to go at home. I'm going to play this audio now, and hopefully you'll be able to take notes to the best of your ability, and then I'll share with you the notes I've taken so we can compare those important points. All right, let's listen in now, see how we do.
Hello, Ms. Jeffers. I'm Matthew, your temp from the agency.
Yes, hello, Matthew. This way, please. I have you set up here. I'm afraid your task isn't very challenging, but it's just for one day. Please have a seat.
Thank you. What am I to do?
These boxes on your left contain envelopes. The boxes in the middle contain letters. I'd like you to put one letter into each envelope. Make sure you fold the letter like this, so the address shows in the window of the envelope. Then put it in this empty box on your right.
Would you like me to seal the envelopes as well? If you have a sponge and a little dish of water or one of those dabber things?
No. Fortunately, we have a machine that will do that.
Okay. Is that all? I don't need to answer any phones?
No, your task is simple. I'm sure you'll be quite sick of it shortly. I apologize in advance for that.
Okay, so that if this was your very first listening practice, as it might be for quite a few of you who are new to us today, perhaps that was your first note-taking attempt. I'm going to show you the notes I took, and they actually do have a lot of detail. You have to remember, I'm very practiced at taking notes, so I was able to jot down all of these points as they were being spoken about. If you didn't catch as many details, that's okay for now. I'm going to walk you through sort of the main points, and we'll see which details you did catch. And I'm also going to emphasize the ones that you probably should have caught to help you answer questions. First and foremost, the names of both of these people were given to us. And I chose just to toss or write down those names right above the man and woman at the top. For me, that just made the most sense. Okay, Matthew is the man. Ms. Jeffers was the woman. That's how she introduced herself. Now, before we even listen to the rest of this conversation or talk about the notes here, I think just by examining the names, we can infer or assume what these two people's job roles are. We know this conversation is taking place in an office. I think just from the names alone, one of these people is sort of like a manager or a supervisor. And the other one, I think, is the employee that is working for them. Which of these two people, based on the names alone, would you suggest is very likely the manager or the supervisor? Would it be the man or the woman in this case? Please let me know in the Zoom chat what you think. Here we're using our inference skills, really important here. And I can see that everybody has correctly identified the woman as very likely being the manager. She doesn't actually say, hey, Matthew, I'm Ms. Jeffers, your manager for the day. She never comes right out and says that. But when you just look at the formality of her name, she's got Ms. as the title word, and then she did not give her first name. She only gave the last name Jeffers. And when we do that, for a man, it would have been Mr. For a woman, it's Ms. When we introduce ourselves in this way, we are being formal. But Matthew, the man, he's only given his first name, and that is very casual. So if you wanted to look at what we can call the hierarchy, so who's the boss and who's working for them, it would have to be the more formal position. Ms. Jeffers is likely the one in charge, whereas Matthew, the more casual name introduction, I would just assume is the one working for her. Okay, so again, making these connections yourself as you're listening is really going to help you to understand the rest of the information that's coming. And sure enough, right after the names are out of the way, Matthew does actually give his job title, which is here. I wrote it down like this. He introduced himself as the temp from the agency. Now, if you're a temp, that means you are a temporary worker. You're not working full time, right? So he's asking, his first question you can see in my notes is, what am I going to be doing here basically for the day that I'm here? If you look over to Ms. Jeffers' column, the first thing that she says is, this job is not challenging. And she gives us the when detail. She says Matthew is only here for the one day. So when he said he's a temp, he's not joking. He's literally there for one day. And then the rest of the conversation is all of the specific instructions, I guess, or job tasks that Ms. Jeffers is giving to Matthew. So I wrote these down. This is what point form looks like. I like to use a little dash or a hyphen, as you can see, in front of every point that I'm about to write down. Some people like to put a dot. Does anybody here use a different symbol? Dashes or dots usually are the most common. You're welcome to write them down however you wish. You just want to be quick and you want to find a symbol, I would suggest, that identifies it's a new idea is all. Notice every single detail that is new starts on its own fresh line, top to bottom. So these notes that I've written say, and I'll use a laser pointer here so I can point out some time-saving tips. First of all, there are lots of boxes included in the instructions. Ms. Jeffers says to Matthew, there will be a box on the left. I just chose the capital letter L for left because it was quick and I knew I'd remember what that meant. And this is where she wants him to put the envelopes. You'll notice I use these little grammatical marks. These are called quotation marks. But when we're taking notes, we can use a quotation mark to tell ourselves that we're actually referring to the word directly above that mark. So instead of taking a moment to say box on the middle, just to save a few seconds of time, I just quickly scratched in these quotation marks. It means box on the middle. So using quotation marks when you can is a really helpful time-saving tip for note-taking. And this is where the letters go, the box in the middle. And I guess Ms. Jeffers wants Matthew to put one letter in each envelope, fold the letter to show the address, and then put the letter in the box on the right. So that made sense to me. Capital L for left, capital R for right. Okay, now you might not have had time, especially if you're new to note-taking. You might not have caught absolutely every single instruction here. And I think that's okay for now. You're not going to be quizzed on every single part of the notes. But just in general, what we do need to understand is we've got a boss giving their temporary employee, who's literally here for a day, instructions on what that man is going to be doing in the office, right? So that's kind of the gist of the conversation. And you'll notice towards the very bottom of my notes, the man has a whole series of questions. I included the question marks there to remind myself. Matthew is asking, he wants to know, is he going to be sealing envelopes? Is he going to be using a sponge with some water to seal them? Will he be answering phones? And I don't know about you, but in my notes, whenever I've got a question, I like to draw an arrow to the answer just to keep my eyes focused when I'm looking for information later. It's kind of like a cause and an effect. It just helps me to find the info faster later on. And you'll notice that for every single question Matthew has about what else he might be doing, Ms. Jeffers says, no, you won't be doing any of that. You won't be using and sealing envelopes with a sponge or answering phones, etc. So when she told him earlier the job was not challenging, again, she was not joking. It sounds like a very, tedious task if you ask me. So this is a very detailed way to look at your notes. All right, I can see that Matthew Allegan is suggesting maybe using asterisks. I think you mean like in front of each point, right? Like I've used dashes and you might use asterisks. Yeah, you can use whatever symbol you wish. My advice though is to find a symbol that's really fast to jot down. So don't take too long just drawing a symbol. You want to make sure it's quick, that's all. But if that works for you, by all means, please use it, okay? We're going to now use the notes we've just talked about for my example, but also the ones you took at home there. I'm going to play for you the very first question. And before I do that, I guess I should point out how this computer screen's organized. So for every question you encounter between parts 1 to 3, you're going to start with 30 seconds on the clock. It'll be in red, as you can see here. And the 30 seconds is going to start counting backwards the moment you land on the question screen. So you have all 30 seconds to make your answer selection. And you'll see here that these answers are actually pictures, right? Looks like a sponge, some boxes, a dish of water, and the phone. So I remember all 4 of these items were indeed mentioned at some point in the conversation. So obviously, whatever we're asked about, we're going to have to look at our notes to figure out. I will tell you that picture answers are quite rare. You don't encounter them very often on CELPIP. Usually you'll have words here or text, but I thought we'd better practice at least one picture activity just in case you encounter this on your own test. Okay, so this is question 1 of, does it say 6? Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Anyway, it tells you exactly how many questions there are and that this is the very first question, if that's meaningful. So over here, remember when the question's read out loud, it says, oh, thank you, David, it says 8. I need to upgrade my prescription for my glasses, so I couldn't see that. Thank you for clarifying. So question 1 of 8, you'll be able to see. Over here, playing this, when the question is read out loud to you, it only takes about 3 or 4 seconds, I would suggest. So this blue bar is going to zip very quickly all the way over to the end here. And then you'll have the remaining time on clock to make your selection. So what I would like to do right now is play this question and see if you can answer it as quickly as you can in the Zoom chat. So here's the question. Please listen carefully.
Question 1.
What is at the man's workstation?
All right, that's it. You get to hear it once and once only. So let me know which of these 4 items are indeed at Matthew's workstation. Remember, this is listening part 1, question 1. It's usually quite straightforward, and it looks to me like everybody has answered it correctly. I think absolutely everyone in the Zoom chat has correctly stated that indeed it is the box. The boxes, I guess, plural, are at Matthew's workstation. And remember when I showed you my notes, just in case you're still not sure how we know this to be true, if you look even at the middle part of the instructions where Ms. Jeffers is telling Matthew what to do, she mentions boxes, envelopes, and letters. Sure, all of these items will be on his workstation, but envelopes and letters are not pictured here. So obviously we won't be choosing them. So the only item left that makes sense would be the box. So that's probably one way to answer this question. A second way that some of you might did, I don't know, if you look at the bottom section, remember Matthew was asking about the sponge, the water, and the phone. And when you look back to those pictures in the answer key there, well, those 3 items are certainly pictured, but to each and every item that he's asked about, remember Ms. Jeffers says, no, you're not using any of those items. So it wouldn't make sense to select the sponge, the water, or the phone for that reason. So box is clearly the correct answer based on the list in front of us. Now, you all answered that so quickly, and that was not surprising. I think this is a pretty straightforward question. I'm going to assume you answered it within 10 seconds of time at the most. And if that's the case, this is when you would click next. Remember that next button, and you'll just move yourself forward to question 2, and you'll be ready to listen to that and so on. I mean, you could wait for the whole 30-second clock to count down. And when that clock gets to 0, by the way, whatever you've answered is submitted to be scored, and the computer will move you forward anyway. But I don't see the value in sitting and waiting when you already know you're happy with your answer. So yeah, click next and just move yourself on so you finish the entire CELPIP test a little bit more quickly, I guess. Okay, so that's all the practice we'll do for part 1, as we want to move on to listening part 2. But what I would recommend on the real test, clearly, you would go through all of the questions in the order. Once you've completed the first part of audio, so there are usually 2 to 3 questions there, all I would recommend you do for listening part 1 is just on the same notes you've already taken, why not just extend the lines down? I like to draw a line across as well to separate the parts, and then I label it as number 2. It just keeps me organized. Again, some of you might wish to do that as well. The questions you're answering will be focused on that particular part of the audio you're listening to, but I think it's just helpful to see the big picture. So sometimes you might want to go back up to part 1 and remember, oh, wait, Matthew's only there for 1 day, right? We've already learned that. So again, you'll have all of your notes for the whole conversation on 1 page. And I think that will keep you most organized. Okay, I'm going to go on to part 2, but before I do that, do we have any outstanding questions about listening part 1 or about listening in general at this point? This might be a good time just to quickly check in and see if we've got questions before we move on to the new part. Okay, everything looks good. Fabiana says, nope, it's perfect. We're ready. Okay. I'll move forward now. And again, if you do have questions, please put them in the box and Simon will head in there and answer for you as we move on. So here we go. Part 2, listening to daily life conversation. So no longer problem solving. It's more about a daily life situation. Again, you're going to have 2 speakers. We know it'll be a man and a woman just to help us keep track of who's who. These 2 people happen to know each other, so that's great. So as the title of part 2 says, this will be the 2 people talking about something that is going on in their lives. For example, I guess, it could be a work situation, couldn't it? It might be coworkers, once again, discussing a project that they're working on together. Maybe it's a husband and wife and they're making plans for the weekend. So imagine any situation that happens day to day, something like that will be used for this conversation. Now from part 2 all the way on to part 6, you're going to have just the 1 audio clip. It's no longer going to be chunked down into parts like listening part 1 was, but this audio clip is 2 minutes this time, a little bit longer than what part 1 did. So I think sometimes making a conversation longer is just a little bit more challenging as you have more information to capture. So remember, the test does increase in difficulty as it moves on, but we're going to still apply the same note-taking practice, even though we just have a bit more information to cover. So here is your instructional page, I'll call it. Remember, you're not actually listening quite yet. This page is here to remind you how many questions are coming your way. So you will have 5 questions coming up. We already know that we'll hear those questions read out loud to us. And just like we did in part 1, we'll be choosing the best answer. So when this screen is facing you, this is a good time to start setting up your notes. Do you want to go ahead and do that now? Just on a fresh page, maybe on the back side of the same paper you just used even, just draw yourself a fresh 2-column chart. So make that letter T. And at the top, you might want to put man and woman just to get it all set up and ready to go. You're not on the screen for a long period of time, but you might as well use those few seconds wisely and get the notes set up. You still do have a little introduction as to who you'll be hearing next. There's no picture now, right? Only the picture in part 1. So no picture, but we still have lots of information that's helpful. This one tells us that the conversation is between 2 colleagues. We already know it'll be a man and a woman, that's fine. And they happen to also be in a break room at work. So it's kind of similar in a way, I guess, to the situation earlier. They were in a break room there too. But we don't yet know what they're going to be talking about. That part will be different. Okay, so with this in mind, 2 colleagues in a break room at work. You come to this screen and you get one final reminder about the length of the audio, closer to 2 minutes this time. Okay, I hope you've got your notes all set up and ready to go. I'm going to play this again, or play this now, the conversation, and we'll see how efficiently you can capture the key points. Here we go.
Hi, Naomi. How are you adjusting to the night shift?
I'm not. I can't fall asleep during the day, even though I put something over my eyes to block out the light and wear earplugs to block out the noise. So I'm really, really tired.
I read an article the other night about how the night shift doesn't fit our natural body rhythms. Most of us are built to rest at night. The article also mentioned that people who work the night shift often have concentration problems and even coordination problems.
Well, then I'm glad we're cleaners. Imagine operating heavy machinery or piloting a plane at night.
Yes, there are more accidents on the night shift. The article even said that police officers who work the night shift are angrier than those who work the day shift.
I believe that. My daughter asked me yesterday why I was so cranky. By the way, how do you deal with never seeing your family because you work the night shift?
My parents and siblings are overseas, so it actually works well for me to call them during the day when I'm at home. But I do miss the after-work things I used to do with my friends.
Yes, I guess it's hard to maintain a social life when you work the night shift. But on the bright side, there are no lineups in the grocery store.
True enough. Listen, we've got 10 minutes left on our break. I'll make you a cup of coffee to get you through the next couple hours. Do you drive or take the bus home?
Thanks. A coffee would be great. I take the bus.
Good. Tell the driver what stop you want to get off at and ask him to wake you up. That's what I do. Then you can try to get some sleep on your way home.
I don't know if I can, but it's certainly worth a try. Maybe the movement of the bus will rock me to sleep.
Alrighty, that is the end of that. So yeah, it was definitely longer, right, than that first one. So hopefully you had the concentration to get through the whole thing. I'm going to play this question and see if you can go ahead and answer with what you've already taken. I'm not going to show you my notes quite yet. Let's see if you can do it on your own first. So here's the question.
Question 1. What are the man and woman talking about?
Okay. So go ahead and answer if you'd like in the Zoom chat. You can consider the answers as A, B, C, and D if you wish. So I can see a lot of people using letters there in the Zoom chat, and that's great. I'll know what you mean, of course. And once again, look at how quickly your answers are coming in. That's great. You do have 30 seconds, but you want to answer as quickly as you can probably, so you can move forward with the test. So it looks like almost everybody has answered choice A, problems working the night shift. So before I confirm if that's the right answer or not, I do want to show you the notes just to compare. We'll see what you captured. We'll see what I captured. Now, remember from parts 1 to 3 on the listening test, you're not going to see the questions. You're only going to hear them out loud as we've been demonstrating so far. But on the top of my notes, I went ahead and wrote the question in just to keep us focused here. So remember, the question was, what are the man and woman talking about? So as these two people spoke, I think I captured around 7 or 8 key points. And I'd like to introduce a couple of different symbols that you might find helpful as you're taking notes. So the woman had the same sort of main idea, I felt, where she says she can't fall asleep. And so she's tired, I guess, all the time as a result. So I like to use the letter X when there's a negative idea, when somebody can't or won't do something and so on. It's just fast to draw. Do any of you have a different suggestion or symbol that would also capture a negative idea, but quickly, right? I've got the X. Let us know if you've got something different, and that would be helpful. Okay, and while I'm waiting for any possible ideas there, I'll move on with my own notes here. Okay, so the man is also saying he doesn't fit or doesn't work well with our body rhythms. So whatever they're talking about, it doesn't seem like a very positive thing is happening. A lot of you in the Zoom chat are suggesting using a negative sign, like a positive or negative to show that. And that would work well too. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. So whatever's fast and whatever makes sense to you, I think that would definitely be suitable there. The man continued. He also mentioned other problems. So continuing on with that negative mindset, he mentioned that there are concentration and coordination problems. So these short forms made sense to me. I don't know how you captured it, but I had to use at least a few. I didn't write the whole word because it would take too long, I felt, but I used just enough letters there that when I looked back, I knew I would remember what I had written down, which is the whole point of note taking. I did go ahead and use a plus sign. So a lot of us are using these already, it looks like. The man said there seemed to be more accidents and people are just angrier, more so now than before. And then the woman mentioned that she's very cranky and she doesn't see her family very often. And the man mentions he misses after work activities with friends. So again, I'm trying to shorten down words wherever I can, but still keeping the idea clear for my own eyes when I look back. All right, and last but not least, the woman finished, I felt like, with the main points, and she mentioned that she doesn't have much of a social life these days. So pretty balanced back and forth between the man and the woman with 3 or 4 key points each, I suppose. So remember, when we're trying to figure out what the man and the woman are talking about, let's go back to the questions page. I think almost everybody chose answer choice A, and you'd be absolutely correct. Problems working the night shift. So remember, just about every single detail in the notes we just looked at gives more or less an example of a problem. Whether you're tired, whether you're cranky, whether you miss your friends and family, and so on. Every single point that we wrote down would be an example of a problem working the night shift. And that is why this is the correct answer. All right, those other 3 don't cover the gist of the conversation. They're not talking about what they do as night cleaners. So choice B doesn't make any sense at all. They're not focusing on the good articles they've read. That doesn't take place over the entire length of their conversation, and nor do they focus on a loud noise they've heard at work. So I would argue that those three remaining answers, B, C, and D, these are all one particular detail, but they don't capture the gist of the conversation. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask you now, whoops, sorry, I skipped ahead. We know that choice A is correct, problems working the night shift. What type of question is that though? So you can see I've included the question on screen so you can review it. What are the man and woman talking about? I think it's helpful as we get really practiced at the listening test, just to know what type of question we're answering. So these are the three types of questions you might encounter at any time on the listening test, but I want to know what is the type of, yeah, okay. So you're all really divided right now between 1 and 2. I'm pleased to see nobody has selected inference. Inference is definitely wrong. You don't have to infer anything because they're speaking about this topic very, very openly. This is not a specific detail question though. The question says, what are they talking about? We are looking at the general big picture overview and understanding that you're being asked the main idea or the general topic of the conversation, that they're discussing problems working the night shift. So every single idea that they speak about is going to refer back to and give us examples of the problems we encounter. Knowing you're dealing with the general meaning is going to remind you to look at larger chunks of your notes. It would be wrong to focus on just one particular detail we wrote in our notes for this question. Okay, so the most important thing is, it seems like everybody got the answer right. That is definitely the most important thing here. But I think once you've, as I say, practiced enough, you want to start familiarizing yourself with the types of questions. Just because when you get into the harder parts of this test, parts 5 and 6 especially, understanding what type of question you're answering will help you know where in your notes to look for that information. So this is just why I'm reviewing the types of questions. And as long as you get the question right, even if you don't know what type of question you just answered, I suppose that's the most important element here. Anyway, we're going to move on to listening part 3 now, which is listening for information. So we're almost halfway through the entire CELPIP listening test. Once again, you'll have 2 speakers. They may know each other, they may not. I don't think that part is really important. The important part is we've got 2 speakers, so we know we'll have a man and a woman. That's a given. We call this listening for information because one of these speakers has information that the other person needs, plain and simple. So for instance, maybe we're listening to this customer who's buying a new car from a salesperson, and you can imagine all the questions the customer would have. Maybe, again, it's a workplace situation, and this employee is explaining a procedure to a new coworker, just for example's sake. So you are going to have one audio clip, as we know, all the way through to part 6. It's always now one audio clip. This one is longer still. Notice that we started with about 1.5 minutes in part 1, about 2 minutes in part 2, and now we're up to about 2.5 minutes. So progressively through the first half of your listening test, you're adding on just a little bit of time. Conversations are getting just a little bit longer, which again increases difficulty a little bit because you just have more information to listen for is all. Okay, now here's our screen. Once again, really the only important detail at this point we need to notice is how many questions. Everything else is the same. We still know we're going to hear those questions read out loud to us next, and we'll have to answer the questions and so on and so on. But 6 questions. I think once again, this would be a great time to start setting your notes up, and we can still use the same format. We have 2 people, a man and a woman. So can you please go ahead on your paper at home there and draw a fresh 2-column chart? At the very top, you can put M and W if you wish for man and woman. So you'll be ready to start jotting notes down as soon as the audio starts. Remember, you've now got that introduction line here, and it tells you the general or big picture idea about what we're about to hear. So it looks like a retail situation now. No more work situations. This one is a customer and a worker. So we don't know who's who. We have a man and a woman. We don't know which one will be the customer and which one will be the worker. So that's the first thing you'll want to listen for as they begin talking. Figure out who's who, and then we can see what they're talking about. The conversation, we're told, is taking place at a mattress and bedding store. So right away, can we do some more predictions or pre-listening? If we're going to be listening to a customer and a worker at a mattress and bedding store, What can you expect the conversation to be about? I think this one's quite obvious. Just real world situations. What on earth could a customer and a worker be talking about at a mattress and bedding store? So make that prediction. What do you suppose they could be talking about? Just in general terms. Yeah, we don't have to get into specific details, but just in general terms, Cornelius has sort of the right first step forward is an inquiry. So what do you think the customer maybe is asking about here? Yeah, so I would agree here. We're looking to buy some sort of a mattress, maybe a pillow, maybe a comforter or a bedspread. We don't yet know what the item is that the customer is interested in, but clearly it's going to have something to do with sleeping. They're at a bedding store. So again, whether it's an actual bed or a mattress or a pillow or a pillowcase, what have you, something like that is clearly going to be taking place here. And we can assume that the customer will have some questions and the employee is very likely going to be giving information to make the sale. So that's where my mind goes when I see this. And when we understand that, we have a better sense of what we should be listening for coming up. Okay. So again, pre-listening, you're just sort of focusing on the information to come, and I find it helps your brain to concentrate a little bit better on the conversation. So just before you listen, remember, it'll remind you this one's closer to 2.5 minutes. So I trust you've got your notes set up and ready to go there. I'm going to go ahead and play the entire audio. And once again, we'll see how easily you can capture the main points. Remember, you still need to figure out which person is which. So where you've got man and woman at the top, you'll want to fill in either customer or staff member. Figure out who's who and write it down. Okay, here's the conversation now.
Hi, thanks for coming to Mattress and Bedding World. How may I help you?
Hi, I'd like to buy a set of pillows.
Okay. Well, we have a promotion for the holiday season. If you buy 2 pairs of our new feather pillows, you get 1 free.
That sounds great, but my husband is allergic to feathers. That's the reason why we have to get new bedding. He keeps getting itchy eyes. I'm interested in getting some synthetic pillows.
Ah, I see. Well, we do have the synthetic filling, but there are actually a lot of alternatives you might want to consider instead of feather. Are you looking for a firmer pillow or a softer one?
I'm not sure. These are meant to be a Christmas gift for my husband. What are the different types?
Besides the synthetic, we have the memory foam and the latex, which are both really comfortable. If you want something good for neck pain, you might consider a microbead or buckwheat pillow.
Buckwheat? Really? I remember getting a little buckwheat pillow from my physical therapist that I could put in the microwave and put on my shoulder when it was sore. It was really nice, but I don't know if my husband would like sleeping on it.
Yeah, I'd only recommend the buckwheat if you really needs it for pain relief. I think your best bet for a nice gift would actually be the memory foam. It's a little more expensive, but it's our most popular pillow right now.
I've heard a lot about memory foam, but I've never actually slept on it. What is memory foam exactly?
Well, it was originally developed by NASA. The organization that sends people into space? It's basically a foam with a cell structure that allows it to form around whatever it touches and then spring back into shape, so it never loses its shape, unlike other kinds of pillows. It really is comfortable. I use one myself.
Well, it sounds nice. I think I'll get these 2. One for my husband and one for me.
Sounds good. Follow me and I'll ring these up for you. Would you like to take a look at our pillowcases as well?
All right, that is the end of that one. Okay, so here's your question screen. Again, I'll play the question and we'll see if you can answer it first on your own, and then we'll talk about it. So here's your question.
Question 6.
What will likely happen next?
Okay. You'll need a little more time, right? Because the questions are a little bit longer, or the answer choices, I guess, a little bit longer here. Okay. Give you just a bit more time. All right. Looks like we're really strongly leaning towards the first option. So before I confirm your answer, let's talk about the type of question. This is where knowing the type of question is so important. So even though on the actual test, you'd never read the question for part 3, I wanted to remind you, this is what the question is that we just heard. What will likely happen next? And as we did before, could you kindly, in the Zoom chat box, let me know what type of question we're dealing with? What type of question are we dealing with? Is it general meaning? Is it specific information? Is it inference? So you're welcome to use the numbers here corresponding to the type of question if you wish. And yeah, as I'm looking into the Zoom chat right now, I can see that you're all divided. I'm getting absolutely every single type of question mentioned here. And that's, well, I mean, I'd like you to know the type of question, but even if you don't, if you're still able to get the question right, I guess that's better than nothing. But I think for this type of question, it's really important. Here's your keyword, likely. And the moment you see a word like this, what will likely happen next? That tells us that we have to make a guess. In other words, if this conversation were to have continued, which of these 4 options would be the action that would occur next with the highest probability? So we don't yet know the answer specifically in a way that it hasn't been directly stated. Instead, what we have to do is we have to look at all of the notes that we've just made, and we're going to just have to take a guess or make an assumption about what's happening next. So this is a very good example of what we call an inference type question. And there are lots and lots of words that you might encounter that imply inference. We could have asked the question this way. We might have said, what will probably happen next? What is implied by the end of the conversation? Can you tell what will happen next? Here's what we did have. What will likely happen next? What is suggested by the end of the conversation? And so on. So your ability to actually recognize an inference question when you hear one or when you see one is going to remind you that none of these 4 answer choices are anywhere in your notes because they were not directly stated. So that means you have to make assumptions. And when you understand that, you are much more likely to get the answer correct. Another enormous clue here, I don't know if this was helpful for you, it should have been. This is question 6 of 6. What this means is it's the very, very last question of the entire conversation. So that would make sense then. We want to look towards the bottom end of our notes. Since we're trying to predict what the next thing would be to happen anyway, here's sort of the bottom end of my notes. And you must have recognized by now that the woman is the customer. So you can see I put that beside the woman up top, and the man is clearly the salesperson. So the woman ended this conversation by saying, I will get these 2, one for my husband and one for me. Now she was speaking about pillows in particular. So when she says, I'll get these 2, I can imagine in my own mind's eye, and I hope you can as well, that she's either holding these 2 pillows that she wants to purchase, or maybe she's simply pointing at the 2 pillows that are in the sales rack. Either way, she clearly has identified the 2 precise pillows that she's going to purchase, and the man gets the final word. He basically says, sounds good or fine. He says, follow me, I will ring you up. And when a salesperson is going to ring up a sale, what that means is they're at the cash register and they're going to punch in the dollar amount and the customer will pay, whether by cash or credit card or debit or what have you. Okay, so you can imagine the man and the woman, customer and salesperson walking towards the cash register. The woman's going to pay for these pillows. So that's how the conversation was left. So when you look at those 4 answer choices, well, the only answer that does make sense is A. The woman will purchase 2 pillows. That is precisely what is going to happen next, the moment they get to the cash register and the man inputs the sales price, etc. So A is indeed the correct answer. If you look at those other 3 answers, B, C, and D, they don't make any logical sense at all. Choice B says the woman will check other stores. And I say, well, why would she go shopping at other stores when she's already found the 2 pillows she wants to purchase? That doesn't seem likely. And choice C there, the man will special order the pillows. Well, the salesman doesn't have to do any more ordering because the woman has clearly made her choice and is going to buy those 2 precise pillows. And last but not least, the man will show the woman more pillows. Same logic. He doesn't have to. I mean, why would he continue to try to show her more pillows when she's already made up her mind? So this is an example of sometimes process of elimination. If you look at these other 3 choices and realize that there's no logic behind them, you're only left with choice A anyways. And this is indeed the answer that most of you selected right off the top. The woman will purchase 2 pillows. So if you knew that right away, great, click it and move on. But if you're a little bit unsure, I think eliminating those other choices will give you confidence, since A is the only one left after the process of elimination, then we would go with it anyway. Okay, so that is the end of listening part 3, halfway through the test. So that would be what I would consider the easier half of this test. We're about to jump into a more intermediate to advanced level. So even if all of you online right now, even if you're not working currently at a CLB9 or higher, I still want you to focus in on the practice we'll be doing together and follow along. You might not know all the words or have all the strategies yet, but hopefully you'll take away some helpful tips here as we continue moving on. Okay. All right, let's go. I'm going to leave Tracy. Simon can answer that question for you if you don't mind. Alrighty, let's get into it. Listening to a news item. This is the very first time in the CELPIP listening test where you have one speaker only. So it could be a man or a woman, and that part doesn't matter at this point, but one speaker. And just like the title says, you're going to be, the speaker rather, will be providing information, sort of like what a news reporter would do, giving current event reports on TV or online. So just think of any news reporter item you've ever heard in your whole life. I mean, any topic is fair game, I suppose. Maybe the conversation's all about a new technology and how it can help people, or perhaps the reporter is giving us a spiel about an interesting encounter someone had with an animal, that sort of thing. Okay, now this is going to be one audio clip, as we know. The length is much shorter again. So that's the silver lining. This is only going to be about 1.5 minutes, but you're going to notice that the vocabulary is higher level, and the types of questions or the types of connections that you'll want to make are also going to be at a higher level. So that's the trade-off. Shorter conversation, sure, but higher level skills in every other part. So bear that in mind. Okay, now here's your instructional screen, and I am going to read it out loud to you now, just because it's different from what we've done up until now to part 3. So these instructions tell us that we'll still hear the news item once, that's fine. It's about 1.5 minutes long. Okay, that's great. But then it says about 5 questions will appear, and then choose the best way to complete each statement from the drop-down menu. So no longer will we be hearing the questions read out loud to us. Instead, on one computer screen, after that audio has finished, you're going to see all the questions. So it's up to you now to read the beginning part of the question, and then you're going to select the answer that makes the most sense, is all. And you'll see what it looks like visually when we get to the actual questions page. But please be aware, no longer are you listening to questions. You're actually responsible for reading them yourself. So slightly different approach. Okay. This one still gives you a little overview as to the general topic. So it says we will be hearing a news item about a community power issue. So when I hear that, my mind is thinking this is probably about hydro. Maybe it's about electricity. That seems to make sense. So the news report is going to be about that in general terms. Now, up until now, we've been using this 2-column chart, and it's worked well for the 2 speaker conversations, but we've only got 1 speaker this time. So it doesn't seem to make sense to have 2 columns, right? Instead, because we're listening to a news reporter, what I would suggest we at least try, this might be a lot for some of you, but let's give it a try, see how it works today. A news reporter's job is to literally give the listeners information that cover the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of the situation. So as we listen, what we're going to do is definitely focus on the what. You'll notice I made that column wider, and that's because most of the details are going to go under that column. So if you're welcome to copy this chart into your notes right now. You, of course, will need to write the full words, who, what, when, where, why, because every word starts with a W. So you couldn't just use W as a short form. So my advice would be to you, if you're fairly new to listening, or if you're working, say, at about a CLB 7 or lower currently, what I might recommend to you right now is to focus almost exclusively on the who and the what, just to make this job a little easier for yourself. All of us, regardless of whether we're beginner, intermediate, or advanced, should be able to identify who was mentioned in these news reports. So you might hear a person's name, or you might hear their job title, that sort of thing. So capture the who. You need to know the what. So right away, yes, we know this is a community power issue, but we want to be a bit more focused. What specifically are we talking about? We'll capture those details there. If you're practiced enough, or if you've got time, you can also jot down ideas that belong under the when column, the where column, and the why column. I think those are helpful, but I would refer to those final 3 W's as more secondary. It's by far more important to get the who and the what. That's first step for everyone. Again, if you've got the ability right now, you can also add in the when, where, why. But if you're new to listening, or again, more at a beginner level, if you try to do every single column right now, you might find it frustrating and overwhelming. So as you study at home, I do want you to develop study habits that will chunk down the skills practice in more manageable pieces. And then when you get really good at just the who and the what, you can start adding in the other details. That would be my best advice here, just to save you from stress and anguish as you try to do it all in one. Anyway, here's your screen. It looks the same as all others. We're just told the length here. It's about 1.5 minutes. So I'm going to play this audio for you now. As I say, try to capture the details to the best of your ability as this woman is talking. And then I'll show you my notes and we'll go from there.
Due to the high winds over the weekend, many trees came down in our community, several into power lines. Consequently, 100 residents were without electricity for several hours. This is nothing new for most of us, but for Inish Chandra, the experience was anything but routine. A fallen tree caused a live power line to land in her backyard. Fortunately, when she opened her door to let her dog out before retiring for the evening, it refused to move. Puzzled, she shone her flashlight into the yard to investigate and saw the downed power line, only then hearing the buzzing sound. Later the next day, Mayor Pine announced that this problem was actually getting worse. He suggested burying all the power lines or cutting down all the trees within 30 feet of a power line. He admitted, however, that both solutions are too expensive to consider and that the latter would be a shame. Residents are reminded to exercise extreme caution during a power outage. Any wire on the ground or hanging from a pole should be considered live and be avoided. Fires should be reported immediately.
Okay, that was that. So again, this is more intermediate. I don't know your impression of the speaker. I found she spoke a little bit more quickly than the other 3 conversations we've heard today. So, I mean, that's part of it. You get what you get on your own test. We need to just be prepared to handle whatever we're listening to. So hopefully the speed wasn't too challenging for a lot of us and we could still capture the main ideas. Anyway, here are my notes. Again, they're very detailed, and I did that on purpose to show sort of how much you could include in your notes. But what I want to do right now is take us through the must-haves, the details that I'm hoping you did catch. And then I'm going to also point out here on my own notes the extra details that are nice to have, but I don't think you need to focus on them right away. So we're sort of doing this from a more beginner level and a more intermediate approach. So under the who column, you see there are 2 people mentioned. And I guess even before we get to that, the very first thing we heard, and this is the must-have, we already knew that this was about a community power issue. And the focus here, one of the first things that the news reporter said to us is that some trees have come down on top of some power lines. So that's the focus on the electricity that we're learning about. So I don't know what your own notes look like. You're very welcome to share them with us in the Zoom chat if you want. But this is how I capture that. It made sense to me. You'll notice if you follow some of my webinars, I love using arrows. That's my learning style. I'm all about the cause and the effect. So when I've got the cause here, the trees, when I draw the arrow, it just reminds me the trees have come down onto the power lines, and arrows are very quick to draw. So they work well for me. You're welcome to use them if they work well for you too. So we have to know that. This is the secondary piece of information. If you caught it, wonderful. But I don't think you absolutely needed to have it. It's very precise. So because these trees have come down on the power lines, there were 100 residents without electricity. Okay, so that's a more intermediate to advanced approach. Nice to have, but this one I think everybody should have had, just to sort of separate them out. Now, this happened on the weekend. I honestly don't think that's that important anyway. Even if I hadn't have written that, I doubt we'll have a question about when did this occur. You never know though. So I wrote that down. Happened on the weekend in the community. These 2 details I don't think are that important. This one might have been. So the fact that there were high winds, I guess that's why the trees came down in the first place. So I think it's kind of a nice detail to add in if you were able to catch it. But we now have the context of this entire report, I guess. So the first person introduced to us is somebody named Inish Chandra. And in a news report, you'll notice it's more formal and it's the last names that are key. So the questions you get, you'll probably see the last name and not so much the first name. So that's why I didn't take a lot of time to capture the first name in full. I just gave a little bit of a sort of an initial, if you will, but I did write the full last name out just to remember who this person is. So Inish Chandra, I guess she saw the tree on top of the live power line. And this happened in her backyard. Again, that's sort of an extra detail. You might have captured it. But Chandra was the first one we are told about anyway, that saw the tree come down on, or she saw the tree anyway, on top of the live power line. And I guess she saw it because she let her dog out. As she saw the line down, she heard that buzz of electricity. Okay, so any combination of these details is great to have. And then the mayor of the city is the only other person mentioned. We don't know if it's a man or woman. And again, that doesn't matter. But Mayor Pine is the name of this mayor. And the mayor has some thoughts about how to handle the situation. They suggest that either we're going to have to bury those lines underground, right? I guess so they can't come down on the trees, or we'll simply have to take the trees out, either or. These are the solutions. But I wrote down that dollar sign there to remind myself that this would be quite costly if we were to use that approach, according to the mayor. Okay, now the mayor gave their report the next day. Again, I don't think this is all that important, but I wrote it down to show you a more intermediate to advanced level. Some of you might have caught that. Okay, so this is sort of the gist of the two people's perspectives on the situation. I left a small space here because there's a bit of a conclusion here. The reporter is saying that residents are reminded to be careful, right? To take caution. If we see a wire, consider it live and avoid it. Well, that sounds common sense to me, right? Any one of us would avoid a live wire that we see down. And this is also common sense, I think. If you see a fire, well, report it immediately. So that is the gist of this conversation as well. Okay, let's take what we've got here. And I already see some people saying, oh, I don't know if I have enough time to write these details down. And yeah, that's why I mentioned earlier, we all work in different styles of learning. We all work at different speeds and abilities too. So this method, it works well for me. But again, I mean, English is my first language. I've been teaching English 26 years and so on. So this works for me. If it doesn't work for you, you'll want to find an organizational structure that does. That's why I mentioned earlier, it's the who and the what that are the most important. So that might be all you want to focus on for now. And that probably would be enough to answer most questions correctly. But as you become more practiced, you'll want to start adding in some of these additional details for sure. Okay, here's your screen, your questions page, I guess you'll call it. Remember, you're now reading all of the questions in one go. So you can see all 5 questions there on screen facing you. Oops. You can see all 5 questions there on screen facing you. We are going to do question number 5 at the bottom for practice. You're going to have one chunk of time in minutes up on the screen, and it will vary depending on what part you're doing, but you'll have whatever the number of minutes start with up here to answer all 5 questions. I guess in these parts, technically you could answer them in any order you wished, but I would still highly recommend you answer them in order. Because remember how the questions generally follow the same order as what we've been learning about throughout the conversation and our notes. So it's still helpful, I think, to work our way down. So let's pretend we've answered the first 4 questions and we're now going to tackle question number 5. So I'm going to show you, oh, you yourselves, by the way, need to click that little drop down arrow inside the white box at your computer screen. And when you do that, that's what's going to open the multiple choice box. So I think you can answer this right now. Do you want to go ahead? The news item ends with, so go ahead and make your selection into the Zoom chat if you wish. Is it analysis? And by the way, analysis means a discussion of careful consideration. Is it criticism? So this would be something negative, like maybe blaming somebody for why these trees have come down, perhaps. I think we all know what questions and instructions are, so that's fine. So I'll give you just a moment there to make your selection. All right. One of you privately says to me, I don't know, and that's okay. If you honestly didn't know on the test, what I would recommend you do is try to eliminate 1 or 2 of these answers that doesn't seem to make much sense at all. And then you might honestly just have to guess either way. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my notes. And here's what I'd suggest we all do, regardless of what your notes look like in front of you right now. Question 5 is the last question of the bunch, and it says the news item ends with. So why not look at the bottom of your notes? And because all four of these answer choices are nouns, they're things, I would look under the what column, right? That's where we would find the things that were talked about. So this is, I'm showing you remember the very bottom section, sort of the conclusion that we talked about under my notes there. So when we look at those notes, ideas, residents are reminded to be careful, wires are considered live, avoid them, and a fire should be reported immediately. We're not analyzing anything. We're not collecting data, evaluating, etc., right? We're just being told what to do to stay safe. So analysis doesn't really make any sense. And I'm pleased to see nobody's criticizing anyone. There is nothing negative here. Nobody's blaming anybody for the situation. So criticism doesn't seem to make much sense. So we're now left between questions and instructions. Well, I don't see any questions in my notes. I did not include any question marks. So let's rule that out. And it would be kind of unusual, don't you think, to end any news item with a question? The reporter normally gives us the information. They don't ask us questions at the same time. So I think we could have eliminated choice C right from the start. So we're only left with instructions. Instructions is actually the correct answer. And when you look back at what we have in our notes, literally everything we've written in that conclusion is all about what we should be doing. It's kind of like advice that we could follow in order to stay safe. And that's what instructions are. It's when we tell people what to do in very plain and simple terms. Now, on your listening test, you're not going to have a transcript, of course. You only get to listen and take notes. But I do have the transcript of that sort of last section of the audio on screen for you, just to remind you or to show you where the notes up top that we've taken match. So remember, when we see residents are reminded to, that's kind of the clue words that tell us, oh, these are instructions. And those 3 points that I included in my notes up top, that's where they came from. We should do this. We should avoid that. We should report these, right? So that's how you tackle that. So again, it's no surprise to me right now that a few more of the private questions in the Zoom chat are saying, geez, I'm really not sure. And that's normal. Remember, part 4 of the listening test, which is where we're at now, on to part 6, it noticeably gets more difficult. And the test is designed that way specifically because it's going to identify the beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced listeners. So it's not a trick, like don't get fooled by it and don't feel frustrated. If you think it's a little bit harder than all the other practices we've already done, you're exactly right. The test is designed that way specifically. All right, so I'll help you work through the strategies that will hopefully assist you as you continue to practice at home. Whatever answer you do select is going to be inserted into the blank, as you can see here. So the news item ends with, we said instructions, and that does happen to be the right answer. So it's in green print, I guess, just to let your eyes know you've answered the question. If you want to change your answer, you certainly can. Just click on that word instructions or whatever answer choice you have. The computer will open again the 4 possible answer choices. And you just have to choose something different. The computer will change it for you. So I guess you could change your mind as often as you needed to, but I will caution you that whatever you've got answered in all of these questions, when that time clock gets to 0, that's what's going to be submitted for the computer to mark. So you do want to keep an eye on your timer at the top of the screen and just work through the questions at a good pace. I think from a time management plan, I would honestly suggest about 30 seconds per question, which is exactly what we have been doing all the way through listening parts 1 to 3. If you can kind of try to stick to that, you'll find that you'll have time to get through all the questions anyway, and you probably will have time left over to go back to some of those more challenging questions and spend more time thinking about them. That would be my best advice. If time is really low and you don't have a lot of time to think about it, honestly, just guess. Like open the answer box and click something. And if you're lucky, you get it right, you'll get a point. That's the way that works, but you don't want to leave it blank, right? As there's no opportunity then for points. Okay, let's move on to part 5. Part 5 is the most unique. It's the most different from all other parts of the listening test. So let's get into that. It is the only section of CELPIP listening that has 3 speakers. So I guess you'd have what, 2 men and a woman, or perhaps 2 women and a man. You'll still have a combination of male and female voices, but there's got to be 2 of something, right? Because you have 3 speakers altogether. They know each other because they're going to be talking about one general topic, but each of them is going to be presenting their ideas or their feelings or some information about it. Sometimes they might agree with each other, and at other times they'll have very different ideas. So we wanted to notice that as we're listening. For example, you might hear three classmates and they might be discussing each person's tasks or responsibilities on a project. Maybe we're listening to three neighbors who are planning a giant block party for the neighborhood, which sounds like a lot of fun. Again, it'll still be a day-to-day situation. This is the only part of your CELPIP listening test as well that is a video clip. You're still going to listen and take notes. That part's the same, regardless of what part of the test you're on. But this one here, part 5, shows you a video. So just like you're watching a movie, right? You're going to see about a 2-minute video clip. And you'll want to keep an eye on the screen now and then as you're jotting down notes or ideas into your notes. Because I think here, as the vocabulary is going to be higher level, it is part 5 after all of the test, I think noticing the facial expressions and the body language and things like that is very likely going to help you understand at least the attitude or emotion of these people. So even if you don't understand all the vocab that you hear, looking for those visual clues as you watch, I think is incredibly helpful here. Okay. Here's your instructional screen. It tells you you will watch a 2-minute video. So we've just established that. And then you have 8 questions. So more questions than we've seen in other parts of this test so far. And of course, it'll be a drop-down option like we just saw. So we have to choose the best answer. You still are going to get a little introduction screen here with some information. And most often they'll actually tell you the name of the 3 people. So this particular practice we're going to do, looks like there's one woman named Anna and the two men, their names are Paul and George. Okay, so at what we would do for this, I would suggest, I think this is the easiest way. Can we all do this right now, please? I would make a 3-column chart because you have 3 speakers this time. If you want to put coworkers on break, because that's what, sorry, I skipped ahead, didn't I? Yeah, it says here that these people are on break at work. So if you wanted to summarize the gist of this conversation here, you can, or I think a lot of us would just remember, oh, these are 3 people that are working together, they're taking a break. Either way, write it down or don't, that's totally up to you. But I would recommend we have the names of these people, Anna, George, and Paul. We're going to label each column with one of their names. And what I would do is wait until you're going to have a little sort of like a freeze frame or a screenshot of the people before you hear them speak and the video plays. And their names are going to be flashed on the screen like you see here. Okay, so we can see Anna is on the left. So on your left-hand column, can you please put Anna's name there? George is in the middle, so put his name in the middle column. Paul is on the right, so again, put Paul's name on the very right-hand side. So while you're watching this video, you're still going to jot down ideas under each person's column. But remember, when the audio finishes, when the video finishes playing, you're not going to see them anymore. It'll just be a blank screen. So I think having your notes organized in the same order that the people were sitting, it's just going to help you imagine in your mind's eye who's who. I think that's just a helpful organizational tool. I will say sometimes, every now and then, you're going to get a detail that does refer visually to the picture, something like this. So what was George, the man in the middle, worried about? And you might be asking yourself, why on earth did they include in the question the position of George at the table? And the reason why that middle detail's been given, that George is the man in the middle, it's just to help you remember which man is which. So when you look at your notes, you're going to be looking then at the middle column if the question has something to do with George. That's all that question detail is there to do. It's to assist you. You would never get a question like this though. Where was George sitting at the table? This is not a memory test. It is a language test. So as I say, any reference to the people in the picture, if you do get a question like that, they'll be designed just to help you keep track of who's who. So I definitely wanted to clarify that just in case you were wondering. Okay, so for today's practice, I trust by now you've got your 3-column notes set up with the names of the people, Anna, George, and Paul. I'm going to play the video for you now, and I'd like you to try your very best to take notes as you're listening. So here we go. Let's give it a whirl.
Can you believe that announcement today? I mean, I'm still reeling.
I think everyone in the office is in shock. I mean, 3 weeks is not enough notice that we're moving the whole office all the way across town.
That's an extra hour of commuting for me each day. I can't believe they didn't consult with us beforehand. Do they think that they can just do whatever they want and we'll just go along with it?
I don't know. I've always found management here to be really respectful. I'm sure they wouldn't do anything like this unless it was absolutely necessary. It makes me wonder if they're running into some kind of financial problem or something. I mean, I know that the rents in that part of town are a lot cheaper.
You know, the sales force has been having some real problems. But still, you can't spring a move like this with only 3 weeks' notice. I just moved to a new apartment to be closer to work. I should have stayed where I was. Now I have to buy a car.
Okay, by the way, I should have said this earlier. I didn't play the entire video clip. I just gave you a little excerpt. I think it was the first 45 seconds, just to make it a little bit easier for you. So with that much covered, let's have a look at our question screen. So here are all 8 questions. And again, you'll have that chunk of time at the top. Whatever time you're given varies by part. We are going to answer question number 2. And the reason I've selected this is because I feel that it is probably the hardest question of the bunch. Okay, so because it's a bit of a tricky question, I'm going to do something a little different right now. I've just turned off the Zoom chat box just for a second, because I really do want everybody's focus on the question rather than jumping in a bit too early in the chat. So let me show you the question here a little bit bigger, making it easier to answer. So it says, what would Paul, the man on the right, there's that descriptive detail. So that just says, look at the right-hand column in your notes. What would Paul have done if he'd known about management's decisions sooner? So before I even open up the answer box and show you the selections, what I want us all to recognize is we have to recognize what management is deciding to do. So as these people were talking, it was very clear that the management or the office is being moved across town. So when we say, well, what would Paul have done if he'd known that the office was going to move across town? In your own mind, that's how I'm hoping you're approaching this. It makes it a lot more clear, I think. So management's decision, moving the office across town. Now, what makes this question a little bit tricky is because of the grammar, honestly. So this is a language test, and recognizing grammatical structures is going to help you answer more efficiently. This is an if question. So when we see what would Paul have done if he'd known, that tells us that Paul honestly did not know that the office was going to move across town. So we have to come to terms with that in our mind before we even look at the answer choices. So when we open them up, here's what we see. So again, we are being asked to consider, think of it this way. If Paul could somehow magically go back in time, and if he really truly did know the office was going to move, what would he have done differently? That's basically what this question is asking us. So here are the choices I'd like you to consider. Would Paul have A, purchased a new car? Would he have B, worked to increase his sales? C, stayed in his previous apartment? Or D, begun to look for a new job? What would he have done? I'll give you about 15 seconds to think it through, and then I'm going to turn on the Zoom chat box again and invite some answers here. But I do want you to think it over on your own first this time. It's a bit tricky. So you're looking at your notes, probably under Paul's column would be the most obvious. Okay, so the Zoom chat box is open again. Go ahead and select your answer if you already know, A, B, C, or D. Totally up to you. Let's see what we come up with. So you can see as you're looking through the Zoom chat answers coming in, we're getting most of you fairly divided between choices A and B, or sorry, A and B, A and C. So we're not sure it would appear if it's A, purchased a new car, or C, stayed in his previous apartment. And I understand why you're a little bit divided on that, because Paul did say something about having to buy a new car, but we also did mention about moving. So both of those answers seem to have a little bit of logic. So why don't we examine here? Let me give you some helpful hints. Now, I would not, in my own notes, I did not write the full sentence. That would take far too long for any one of us. But just to help you out on screen, what I did is I wrote down the entire sentence that Paul said out loud towards the end section of that video. Paul says, I just moved to a new apartment to be closer to work. And right after that, he says, I should have stayed where I was. So that's more or less where we ended the video clip. With that in mind, only one of those two answers makes sense. So is it really A, purchase a new car, or would he have C, stayed in his previous apartment? Again, I don't know exactly what you wrote in your notes in Paul's column, but on screen, you can see word for word, verbally, what Paul just said out loud. And I'm really pleased to see now that a lot of us are adjusting our answer. And you're right, it is C. Stayed in his previous apartment is what Paul wished he'd have done. If only he'd known, he just wouldn't have moved away. Okay, now the reason why I think answer choice A is chosen here by quite a few of you is because right after that, right after Paul says, I should have stayed where I was, he did say this, now I have to buy a car. And he was quite angry about it or frustrated. When he mentions the car, you can see in answer choice A up top, the answer choice reads, purchase a new car. But just because the car is mentioned in the answer choice, and just because Paul mentions it in his part of his video, it doesn't make it the right answer. When he says, now I have to buy a new car, he's actually referring to the next action or the future action he's going to have to take now that he's just so far away from work. And this question isn't asking us, what will Paul do next? If that's what the question was, what will Paul do next now that he knows the office is moved? Well, the answer would have been A. He's going to have to purchase a new car. But that's not the question. The question is focusing on the past. So what would he have done earlier? What would he have done differently, I guess, if only he'd have known? So that's why choice C is correct. It really boils down to the grammatical structures in the question. So remember, this is listening part 5 out of 6. This is much more intermediate level. So yes, coming into the test with a greater understanding of especially verb tenses and time frames like this is going to be the difference between getting the question right or wrong, as you can see here. Okay, we're not focusing on the future for this question. We are indeed focusing on more or less the past. What would he have done? Okay, so a little bit tricky, but a very good example to go over to give you thoughts about the types of questions you might encounter. Again, of the all 8 questions here, and you can go back and do the rest of the free practice test B. We've just done question 2 for practice. I think this one is definitely the most challenging of the bunch, at least in my opinion. So that's why I chose to do it with you, just to give some guided discussion. Not all the questions will be quite as involved, but some of them will. And I think coming into CELPIP knowing that is definitely going to help you out in the long run. Okay, who's with me? Are we ready to move on to listening part 6? This is the very last section of the entire CELPIP test. And I like the enthusiasm coming from the CELPIP Zoom chat, or the Zoom chat box, I mean. So this is going to be advanced level. It is going to be challenging. I am not going to sugarcoat it, but I will help you with it. And hopefully you'll get some strategies to help you study on your own by the time we're done today. In part 6, you are going to have one speaker again. So remember, throughout all 6 parts, we had a single speaker in part 4. That was the news reporter talking about the trees on the power lines. And then again in part 6, you're going to have one speaker. So those 2 sections have just the one speaker. Could be a man, could be a woman, doesn't really matter, but one speaker only. Now this section is called listening for viewpoints. And what viewpoints are is they are opinions or perspectives. So the speaker is going to first, as they start talking, identify the main topic of the entire, it's kind of like a news report, if I'm honest, right? So the main topic we always have to identify right away. And as soon as we know what the main topic is, the speaker is going to mention a couple or 3 people, likely both by name or by job title. So your primary goal as you listen is to understand the main topic and then write down any name or any person you meet throughout this report. Write their name down. Your job is to figure out what they feel about the topic. So what is their viewpoint? What is their opinion all about the topic? Okay, and then here's the really challenging part. We want to understand why they feel that way. And because part 6 is relatively advanced, we have to rely a lot on our ability to make inferences. So based on everything we learned throughout this listening passage and all the notes we've taken, there should be just enough information there for us to use logic to understand why that person likely feels as they do. And if you're able to do that, which does take practice, it's a hard skill. But if you're able to do that, it's going to make it easier and faster to answer more of these questions accurately on the test. And I'll help you with that today as we go. All right, so for example, you might be listening all about, it could be a speech about climate change, perhaps, and what people can do about it. I can see that easily covered on a CELPIP test. Maybe it's a presentation about the effects of some sort of technological development, right? So again, anything you can imagine listening to on the news, or more or less, I would say, is something you might encounter here. So this, again, it will be an audio clip. The only video you get is in part 5. This is still back to now just a regular audio clip that we're listening to. but it's the longest one you're going to face on the entire CELPIP listening test. So that does add to a little bit of the challenge here. This one will be closer to 3 minutes. So bear that in mind. Here's our instructional screen. So it reminds you the audio is about 3 minutes. And then we get the reminder of how many questions are coming. 6 questions will appear. Okay, and the rest is the same. We still have the questions on screen we read and the drop-down menus there. So we would use this moment here to set up our notes, but I think we would set our notes up a little bit differently here. I'll show you what I mean. The instructions tell us that this presentation is going to be about advertising and children. So there's already that general topic or the main idea, advertising and children. So with that in mind, here's how I would recommend you try your notes for this practice. If it works for you well, you can continue to use it for your own practice. I went ahead and I did write from the test instructions. I went ahead and wrote advertising and children at the top of my notes just to remind myself that's the main topic here. You'll notice from those 5 W's, I've chosen only 3 of them, and it's the who, the what, and the why. Those are the most important, and I think honestly, those are the only 3 we'll have time to use anyways. So if you wanted to try this today, why not copy this down now, make yourself a fresh note, 3 columns, you can label them who, what, why. If you can fill all 3 of these columns in well, then you'll have a lot of information to help you answer questions later. Okay, who, what, why. Shouldn't take too long to get the notes set up. Here is our screen. We're reminded 3 minutes long is the entire conversation. I'm only going to play you the first 35 seconds. We're going for practice. We're going to make this a little bit more manageable. Okay, so we'll just listen to the first 35 seconds. I will also give you a little hint here. You're only going to encounter 1 person. In the actual test, the entire audio clip, you'll probably encounter 2 or 3 people. But in this first 35 seconds, there's only 1 person's name that's mentioned. So I'm just giving you that helpful tip right now to guide you. So write that person's name down. Also, if you could write down sort of who that person is, like if they have a job title, that would also be helpful. Figure out what this person feels about advertising and children and try to wrap your minds around why they feel as they do. Alrighty, I'll play it for you now and we'll see how it goes.
The increased amount of television advertising aimed at young consumers has led some parents to question whether such targeting has negative consequences. Kathy Chen is a concerned mother of 3 young children. She recently started a parents' network that is advocating for constraints on advertisements aimed at children. Chen's personal concern is that advertising to children is unethical because it causes children to nag their parents for products, harming parent-child relations.
Okay, again, we cut it off there, remember? On the real test, that would go on for a much longer time. But for this practice, I think those first 35 seconds is definitely more than enough. Okay, so here's the question screen. Once again, as this is quite advanced, I'm just going to quickly turn off the Zoom chat box. So we're not all jumping in there at different times. Let's just focus on the screen for a moment. And then I'll turn the Zoom chat box on in just a moment here. So let's answer. We can only really do the first couple of questions now based on those first 35 seconds. So we're going to do question 1. And the name of that person is in the question. I hope you also captured her name and wrote it down into your notes as it was mentioned. So question 1 says, Kathy Chen is responsible for. So I'm going to go ahead and display the answers on screen. You can see how long all of the answer choices are. And this is very typical in your listening part 6. This is the most advanced. So your ability to do 2 things, skim read quickly and to be able to understand paraphrases or summarize sentences is going to help you, because a lot of the answer choices here in part 6 will be just that. It will be paraphrasing different ideas that were discussed throughout the lecture. So I'm going to go ahead while the Zoom chat is off. I'm going to go ahead and read out these answer choices to you. And I want you to see if off the top of your head, one of them is already making sense based on what you learned and wrote down in your notes. So we're trying to figure out, what is Kathy Chen responsible for? Is it A, creating a children's advertisement-free television network? Is it B, beginning a group that advocates for more children's TV programs? C, banning children's advertising from state broadcasters? Or D, pressuring for limits on advertising to young children? So quite a lot of information. So I'm hoping that maybe you can eliminate 1 or 2 already. But before we really dive deeply into the wording in these answer choices, I thought we'd better at least look at our notes and maybe share some ideas about what we captured. So I'll start us off if you don't mind. So notes about Kathy Chen. Let's pretend this is my note. You've got your own notes at home, I presume. The first thing that I learned is that she is not just a mom, but she is a concerned mom. And I wrote that down, I guess, for two reasons. First of all, it gives us a little bit of information about how she feels about this topic, right? The whole topic is about advertising in children. So I just thought understanding that she's quite concerned about it is very likely going to help us understand her attitude. Okay, so that's kind of the first step. Did you catch any other information about Kathy Chen? I got two more details about her. I've just turned the Zoom chat box back on, and I'm wondering if you can help with the notes here. So what else did you write down about Kathy Chen? Yes, she's a concerned mom, sure, but what other details maybe did you capture? Okay, good. Yeah, some great ideas are coming in. I also had that she's got 3 children. So you can see why Kathy Chen has been included in this particular report, I guess, speaking, or the speech, right? If she has 3 young children of her own, I think it puts her in a relatively good place to have an opinion about the effects of advertisements that are aimed at children. Okay, now there's one other detail that I captured that Kathy Chen actually started as a result about her concern here about the advertisements aimed not just at her own children, but presumably kids everywhere. Did anybody capture that detail? And this was by far the hardest detail to catch based on Kathy Chen here. What did she start? What did she begin? Ooh, Oluwatosin has it. Well done. Yeah, she started this parents network. Okay, so with just that, let's take a pause for just a second. Some of you are also sharing in the Zoom chat box that this speaker in the audio clip we heard is mentioning that sometimes these advertisements aimed at kids is almost harming the relationship between the parents and the children. What I want you all to do right now, before we even go back to the actual answer choices for this question, is I want you to try to relate on a personal note. Think about your own life experience as it applies to this situation. I think doing so helps us understand the feelings of Kathy Chen in this case. So some of you probably have children of your own. Even if you don't have your own children, I want you to imagine, how could advertisements that young children see, whether it's on a tablet or old-fashioned commercial on TV or what have you, how might that harm a relationship between the parent and the kid? Do any ideas come to your mind? Have you ever had to have tough talks with your own children about advertisements and products that are being advertised? Let me know in the Zoom chat how you connect to it personally, and we'll go from there. So fam, yeah, I agree. Some of these advertisements, we might not know what our kids are seeing, right? And some of these advertisements might be negative or bad, as you're saying, like they might even be harmful. So there's a concern from a parent's aspect to want to protect their children from content that we don't think our children need to see. So that's definitely one concept that came to my mind, as well as how the parents and the children react differently. Yeah. The other part of it is Reshma is saying, I don't know if you've ever taken a child through a grocery store checkout, and you know how they like to put all the chocolate bars and all the goodies right there at the cash. So when you're buying all the healthy food for your family, what does your child want? They want that chocolate bar that's on eye level with them, right? And then they start to pester you to buy it for them. I've seen this happen with other families in front of me. And the parents faced with a tough decision. Do they cave in and buy that chocolate bar and save the tantrum? Or do they tell their child no, and then the kid loses it and has a big meltdown? I'm sure you've witnessed this yourself in any type of store or grocery store. Maybe your own child has done this. That's just normal for kids, right? Kid behavior as they get older. So again, if any of these situations are relatable to you, I want you to put yourself in the mind of Kathy Chen. So this is helping us to understand why she'd be so concerned as a mother that these advertisements are coming at her kids. Again, partly it's she might get pestered to buy them things. The other half of it, of course, is are my kids being kept safe? I don't want them to see violence or other bad messages. And this is why then it makes sense to me that she would start this parents network. Before we even talk more about the audio clip from the test, what do you suppose this parents network's probably going to do? If Kathy Chen has such concerns and that she starts this network of parents, what do you suppose the objective or the purpose of this group is all about, based on the discussion we just had? about children's behavior there in our real lives. What is the aim, do you suppose, this parents network is likely going to do? Yeah, so Samson is suggesting perhaps they're going to want to have no ads at all, like somehow stop the ads on TV, or get a plan perhaps that cuts advertisements out, or as Jimmy is saying, maybe at least reduce the number of advertisements. I mean, all of that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so again, we've not even looked at or the rest of our notes or thought back really to the words of the audio we just heard. We're basing this on common sense. We're making some inferences here. And I think part of our ability to do that effectively is to just imagine in real life how advertisements really do affect our own kids or kids that you see in the sphere around you. Okay, so just to prove the point here, here's the transcript. Remember, on the real test, of course, you're not going to have a transcript, but I wanted to show you the transcript of the little clip we just heard, because I really wanted you to see how the notes we've made on the left were taken directly from the words of the speaker as she was talking. So that's where Kathy Chen's name is. I've highlighted in yellow for you, Kathy Chen. So we wrote that down likely. Concerned mom, that's where I took that. 3 young kids, I think most of us got that. And it's right after the kids were mentioned, the speaker tells us that a parents network was started. So far we've captured all of those details into our notes. Right after that, here's where the vocabulary gets really tough. But based on the discussion we just had, and I said to you, what do you think a parents network would be doing? You summarized in your own words basically what the speaker was saying to us in really difficult language. This parents network, according to the speaker of the clip you just heard, is advocating for constraints on advertisements aimed at children. So you might not have understood all of those really high-level vocabulary words, but when you look at this from a real-life lens, you understand that literally Kathy Chen and this parents network, they're advocating for, which means they're basically asking for change to happen. When you advocate for something, that's what you do. You want a change to happen. And specifically, the speaker tells us they're advocating for constraints on advertisements. And you might not have known what the word constraints means, but when you think of this from that real world perspective, it just makes sense that these parents would want to, at the very least, restrict or to limit or to reduce the number of advertisements that their children are being exposed to. Okay, so this is one strategy that is so helpful to overcome challenging vocabulary. When you can relate personally and use logic to come up with the understanding of the why, sometimes you don't even need the big fancy vocabulary from the speaker or from the notes. It just makes sense in our mind. So this whole idea in really complicated vocabulary of advocating for constraints on advertisements aimed at children. So far we've written our notes up to here. All I would do is write it down in simple terms in my own notes. Basically, this parents network is calling for limits on ads for kids. Notice the short form. I'm using the number 4 to represent the word for, and so on. So it's limits or reducing the advertisements. That just makes the best sense. So I think with that in mind, I think we can now go back and answer this very complicated question. Kathy Chen is responsible for. So here are those same 4 answer choices I read out loud to you earlier. Would you like to go ahead and take a guess here? Which one is probably correct based on everything we just talked about now? You can see the notes on the left. I think we've had a really great discussion about real life applications here. So what makes the most sense? What is she responsible for here? Hint, hint, you need to look at the vocab in the answer choices quite carefully. Takes a little bit of mind for detail here. Okay. It looks like from the Zoom chat box, many of you, most of you, in fact, are selecting answer choice D, and a couple of you are selecting choice A. I'm just going to let you know right off the top that choice D is indeed correct. Yes, pressuring for limits on advertising to young children. That summarizes most accurately what Kathy Chen's parents network is hoping to accomplish based on everything we just talked about. So yes, choice D is correct. What I want to do just for extra good practice and good measure today is I'd like to start back at choice A at the very top. And I really want to go through each answer choice one at a time. We're going to prove why those answer choices are incorrect. I think this is valuable practice for your entire listening test. So do you see how choice A in the wording here says creating a children's advertisement-free television network? Now we already know that this is wrong. But what I want you to tell us in the Zoom chat, please, is how do you know it's wrong? Can you find one word from answer choice A that immediately tells you this is not the right answer? Go ahead and let me know in the Zoom chat box. Your only choices are creating a children's advertisement-free television network. You have 7 words to select from. Okay, I haven't really seen the word I'm looking for yet. I see it. Oh, I take it back. Negan gets the gold star today. Look at the notes. Do you see how Kathy Chen has started a parents network? Can you go back to answer choice A? Look very carefully at the vocab. What type of network is mentioned there? What type of network is mentioned in choice A? Do you see it now? In choice A, the network that's mentioned is television. And that's not correct whatsoever. Kathy Chen does not work for TV. She has nothing to do with advertising and TV. She simply wants fewer advertisements aimed at the kids. And that's why she started this parents network. So once you recognize that choice A is focusing on this television network, right away, you know, that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, so again, you might have already figured out D is the correct answer, and I'm happy for you. That's definitely the most important. But being a really astute test taker for reading and listening as we're practicing now, looking at these details and figuring out really particular clues is really going to help you kick up your skill level to the next notch. Okay, so A is wrong. Let's forget about that and move down to B. We already know B is wrong, but I want to know why it's wrong. It says beginning a group that advocates for more children's TV programs. I think there are 2 ways to figure out this is wrong. I will accept either answer. What's the most obvious, do you think, based on our discussion today? I can see both answers in the Zoom chat, and that's great, but what's probably the most obvious of the 2? Yeah. So a lot of you are figuring out that choice B is asking for more TV programs or children's TV programs. And remember, the whole point about this, Kathy Chen and her parents network, they want to limit, they want to reduce the number of ads. They certainly don't want more of anything. So I think that word more was definitely the easiest clue to identify. That's how we know this is wrong. But the other half of that, and a lot of you are also catching this, choice B is talking about TV programs. They're not focusing again on TV ads or advertisements in general. So you sort of have 2 reasons why answer choice B is incorrect. So whichever method you chose, I guess would work. But I still think more is the most obvious clue there. Oh no, we're not talking about more, we want less. So that would be wrong. Okay, we already know C is incorrect. We've already established that. The language here says banning children's advertising from state broadcasters. We've not yet encountered the word banning. So up until now, honestly, we've had no reason to even consider this. This is a tricky one because you don't really have a lot of context clues from answer choice C to guess what that word means. I think in this case, you honestly either know what that word means or you don't. Can somebody help us out in the Zoom chat? What does the word banning mean? Think about news reports that you may have heard this term, and I'll give you a really good common example right now off the top of my head. In the summertime, in many parts of the world now with climate change, I know in Canada, in BC where I live, we often in summer have to ban campfires during, if we're camping in the summer months, because we don't want to risk starting a fire. So that's kind of where that word to me makes the most sense, just because I've heard it in my own life so many times. So when you know that the word, if we're banning campfires, it means that we're not having any campfires. We're not allowed. Too high of a safety risk with fires. So when you ban something, you stop it altogether. Plain and simple, you just stop it. And it kind of, I mean, when you look at what this whole conversation's about, sure, the Parents Network and Kathy Chen, they don't want these advertisements coming at their children. But I don't think it's accurate enough to say that they want to stop the advertising altogether. They don't really want to ban it. When you look back at the notes, it was very clear that they want to limit, they want constraints, they want to limit or reduce the number of ads. So if you absolutely had to select between answer choice C and D, even though both of them are sort of along the same lines, they both talk about having, I guess, fewer advertisements and so on. D is definitely the most accurate based on the language, right? Banning is a little bit too severe. It's not accurate enough. We're not banning or stopping outright. We're just asking to limit or reduce the numbers. So this is why choice D is correct. Okay, so I just wanted to do a very, very in-depth sort of walkthrough step by step. Again, I think noticing these little clues on your own as you're going through your own practice tests and so on are going to start to help you see the bigger picture and be able to answer more questions effectively on your own as well. But D is indeed the correct answer. We would click it and lo and behold, the computer inserts it and on we go, and you would finish the rest of the test. Just really quickly, if you look at the other questions, and we won't take the time to do any more right now, Kathy Chen is mentioned in questions 1, 2, and 6, I notice. And then in questions 3, 4, and 5, it's a different person. This person's name is Ralph Greenman. So quite often you'll get, the first time the person's name is mentioned, you'll often get the first and last name. And then the second or subsequent time the name is mentioned, it's usually the last name, like you see in 4 and 5, Greenman. So that's why when you're taking notes, it's most important to capture the last name. First name's helpful, but the last name is always going to help you out. So just a little tip there. And again, you can go back to practice test B and listen to the rest of this conversation or this speech, I guess, and you would get more information about Ralph Greenman too. But I think that's enough practice for one day. Anyway, very quickly, we are just at time today, which is perfect. I'm going to very quickly run over some of our free study materials. And if you do have any questions, now is the time to put them in the Zoom chat before we log out for the day. I am going to mention briefly, in case you don't already know, that the CELPIP test has a partnership with the National Bank of Canada. So if you are a newcomer to Canada and you're looking to open a bank account, if you follow through our CELPIP website, there are links there you can follow. And if you open a bank account with the National Bank, they will give you a $300 cashback. And that does cover the cost of your CELPIP test. So it's a little partnership, as I say, that might be applicable to some of you. Feel free to take advantage of that. As you know, CELPIP is mainly an immigration test. It is taken for PR applications and citizenship applications to Canada. And now you can also immigrate to Australia with the test and so on. You can also apply for your postgraduate work permit applications in Canada with the CELPIP score. So I thought I'd better mention that in case it applies to any of you today. We do offer other webinars. We actually have 9 webinars now. They're all free. They're all 2 hours long. Each of these is taught by an instructor that is very well familiar with the CELPIP test. So just like we did today, we do lots of extra practice questions and we answer your questions live in the Zoom chat as we go. So you'll find a schedule of upcoming webinars right on the website, just like you registered for today's session. celpip.ca/webinars will take you right there. Okay. We do have a YouTube channel, and I really hope you take advantage of it because there are so many free instructional episodes posted there. So first of all, the name of the YouTube channel you can see in yellow print at the bottom of your screen. It's simply called CELPIP Official. There are several series there. There's study tip series and so on. This series is called CELPIP Live, and there are more than 100 episodes there that have been delivered live at some point and are just simply recorded into a playlist. And they cover different aspects of the CELPIP test. A lot of them are instructional. Oftentimes we get guest speakers on to share their expertise. They're all free ways to prepare for CELPIP, so we definitely invite you to join us live if you can. We present every second Thursday at 9:30 in the morning Pacific time. Or if you can't catch it live, of course, you can always watch the recorded versions right on the YouTube channel. We also have a podcast series. There are more than 20 episodes currently posted, and you'll find them under the blog section of the CELPIP website. We will be launching a new series soon, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, you can listen to different tips on how to well prepare for your test through these little podcasts. Now, we focused, I realize, on listening today, but for those of you wanting some help with speaking and writing specifically, on our website at celpip.ca, you're going to find under the free prep section something called the score comparison chart. And this allows you to view CELPIP test questions from both writing and speaking. And you'll see 2 different real test takers' answers for each question at every single level, starting at level 12 and going all the way down the chart. So after you've read the test question and then reviewed the test taker's answers, you can click on the response analysis button and you're going to see the rating team's notes for what the strengths and weaknesses were in the speaking and writing sections, basically. So it's a really nice way to understand scoring. If you really want a level 10, let's say, in writing and speaking, well, click on the level 10 and you'll be able to review responses there and so on. We do have those 2 free practice tests that I referred to several times today. I believe our questions we did for practice today are from practice test B, and you'll also see practice test A right on the website. These are the same 2 free tests that you will have downloaded to your online CELPIP account if you do open an account there. The practice tests themselves do have listening keys for both answer keys for both the listening and also reading sections of the test. So you can always see your score immediately there. And for the listening sections, you also get the transcripts included. On the real test, remember, there are no transcripts, but of course, to practice, a lot of us find it very helpful. And once you've exhausted the free materials, you can visit our online bookstore. We do often have half-price sales even, so keep an eye for those. We sell additional practice tests. They are sold in sets of 2. So 13 sets are available for purchase. That means if you bought the whole set, all 13 sets, you would have 26 practice tests to cover. A lot of tests if you wish. There's an Accelerate program. So these are online study programs that you would download to your computer. You have access to them for 6 months, like a subscription. There is a program for reading and writing, and there's a different program for listening and speaking. So you would watch the instructional videos and complete the activities that are associated with writing and speaking. Response analysis is included in each, and you get an actual practice test as well included with each too. So that's nice. Practice and analysis is another great one, specifically for writing and speaking development, as you'll get very detailed explanations about questions and answers on the writing and speaking sections. We do have some ebooks as well. So there is a study guide you could purchase. There's a common CELPIP error book. That one's quite popular too. And there are some ebooks, a textbook series. Again, one for reading and writing and one for listening and speaking. These are PDFs, but they're interactive, meaning you can actually type your answers into these questions. They're right on screen on the PDF program once you've purchased it. And we actually have one print book left, one only. Everything else is online. The only print book left is a vocabulary skills workbook, and it is currently sold at the Chapters Bookstore, which is a Canadian chain. So if you visit our online bookstore at the CELPIP website, you will find links to the Chapters Bookstore website. And if you did purchase this book, you would have the Chapters store would need your mailing address literally to mail this product to you, or you could go into the store in person, I suppose, and purchase it there. Last but not least, you do have contact information. So if you've got questions about test registrations and such, the customer service email at the top of the screen is probably your best bet, info@celpip.ca. I did include links there to the CELPIP website and bookstore just for easy access. And again, reminders of all of our social media channels. We do have 4 of them, as you see listed here. There is free material posted to all of them. I'd recommend that YouTube channel we spoke about earlier. It's the one that has the CELPIP Live series, and then our Instagram channel as well. We post generally 2 to 3 little posts that will help with grammar and vocabulary skills each week. We make these posts, and oftentimes too, we partner up with different CELPIP experts, and we'll do some Instagram lives. The schedule truly varies. It really depends on time zones and availability of all of our speakers. So I would recommend, if you're interested in attending any of these live episodes, you might want to just subscribe to the Instagram channel. And of course, you'd always be notified when we're going live next. So that takes care of that. It looks to me like Simon's done a very good job of answering all of the questions we've had today, which is great. I will make one last call out for any remaining questions, and then we'll log out for the day. I think we're at the end there. All right. Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us together today, everybody. I do appreciate your energies and your focus. I hope you're feeling a little more confident with your own listening skills and your listening test preparations. And perhaps we will see you at the next webinar session. Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.